And afterwards, I spoke with Father Herman, the priest there. And I remember at this time being so bogged down in argumentation for the apostolic churches. And I was expected he would say something along the lines of, like, you need to read this Bible passage, or you need to read this and that. And he said, well, you should just study the lives of one of the saints, like maybe St. Herman, or he might have said like St. Mary of Egypt or something along those lines. That was the perfect thing that he could have said, because I was already so bogged down in hearing every argument that I could find for finding the true faith, that what he offered was, it wasn't argument, it was reality, the reality of the faith.
Welcome, everybody, to the Body Aesthetic. My name is Matthew. This is our podcast series where we interview real people who are sharing their real stories of encountering Christ through their discovery of and conversion to Holy Orthodoxy. Our guest today is Isaiah, who converted to Orthodoxy from a evangelical background. Go ahead, Isaiah, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, and we'll get into your journey to the true faith.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited. And yeah. So my name is Isaiah. I grew up in a small town in Alaska. It is the capital, but it's only about 30,000 people, and it's along the coast, Juneau, Alaska. And so anywhere you go to church there is very unique because it's all quite insular. A lot of the pastors at the Protestant churches are they've been there for a long time and don't have a lot of like connections to outside of this closed little community. You can't drive out; you have to ferry or fly. We have an airport, and so I grew up at a church that was called a Bible church, non-denominational Bible church. That, if I remember correctly, we had our pastor via the SBC, the Southern Baptist Convention. And so it was very much that flavor. Although culturally it was, not Southern in particular. My father was the worship leader for about 15 years there. So like basically my whole adolescence. And my mom was like the secretary, and I went to the private school there for a little bit. So I was very invested in that specific church community. Um, I'm currently going to the University of Alaska Anchorage, where my dad actually graduated as well with his music degree. And that's what I'm studying.
Hmm.
He was, like I said, he was the worship leader at this church, and the style was very it was very contemporary of the 2000s, like, Christian rock music, for people who are familiar with that style. A lot of
So
Lincoln
there's a
Brewster,
stage and
Hillsong. Yeah, there's a stage. In fact, one time he told me that our pastor, he was very boomer flavored. You go into his office and he had like Three Stooges posters
nice.
and Coca-Cola merch and stuff. Yeah, he'd manage stocks from his office all the time. Uh, he he one time requested that we had a mic drop down from the ceiling that he could preach from,
Wow.
like yeah, like an auction show or something like that. So
Classic.
yeah, it was pretty funny. We did not do that. Um, but both of my older brothers also played in the worship team, and so that was a huge part of our family. Was it's a tradition in its own, even though it's very new. You could call it, but the contemporary Christian worship world. That's what my brother is still doing. He is. I'll just say the name of the church because it's pretty big. It's Christ Community Chapel in, I think, Hudson, Ohio. And so he continued along that path. But because Juneau is such an insular community, and I was homeschooled in a very conservative family, there wasn't a lot of exposure to other traditions of the faith. And I would say the most sort of outside of my little church community influence I had was from a Bible camp that was way remote. You could drive to it, but it's way out there. and it's connected with Avant Ministries, which is an interdenominational missionary. I don't know. It kind of functions
Program.
like a company. Yeah, program. Um, and I think they have two Bible camps, two in Alaska, and one in Spain, which is their other like headquarters. I think they're based in Kansas and Spain primarily. And so
Two
most
random
of
places.
the right, yeah. So most of the theological influence that I had, the most of was actually from that Bible camp, more so than the church that I grew up in. Um, the church that I grew up in was very dispensational in its theology, but I don't really remember a whole lot about uh, what the soteriological theology was, because I know we had lots of sermons on like atonement and that sort of thing, but I was very little
Hmm.
to absorb that sort of theology and stuff. And I
You
was in
you
Sunday
weren't
school a
debating
lot.
theology and apologetics when you
No,
were,
well,
tween.
actually, yeah, I was. Unfortunately, I was, but it wasn't so much soteriological stuff. It was for people who are familiar with the especially like West Coast flavor of evangelical homeschooling. Um, One of the big reasons why we were all homeschooled was the creation evolution debate. I remember when Ken Ham and Bill Nye had their public debate. It was like a
Bill
really big
Nye, the
deal.
science guy?
Bill Nye the Science Guy, two
What?
non-scientists debating on a public stage. Yeah.
Two
um,
personalities, basically.
yeah, yeah, yeah. They're proto influencers. Um, and so yeah, the creation evolution debate. People like uh, Dr. Kent Hovind doesn't have a PhD, but a lot of these creation science evangelists is the term, were extremely important to families like mine. And although my dad was a public school teacher, uh, public school was very much seen as like the space of the world, capital W, um, and that they were being indoctrinated with evolution and materialism, which is kind of funny because creation science is from a very materialist worldview. It's not um, certainly not patristic the way that I was taught it. And so I was brought up with um, a faith that emphasized apologetics like a lot, argumentation, creating gotcha scenarios, and
Mm.
using logical fallacies on accident to try and coax people to
On
believe in what you
accident.
believe, that sort of thing. Yeah, yeah. I didn't know it because I was 9, but I was also part of like the Awanas program, which involves a lot of like memorizing verses, Bible verses, and that kind of thing. It's like Boy Scouts for Baptists. Um, and so, despite all that, the strongest theological influence I had was definitely from this Bible camp, which usually brought people from like Alabama, Kansas, Ohio, and you would pay these like college students essentially would pay to be counselors. So they would usually raise money from their church, and then they would come up and have kids out there. And so for my uh, friend group and for my own sake, we were so uh, culturally homeschooled Christian that that Bible camp provided actually a really nice opportunity to be away from our churches and away from our families and kind of um, in a very short period of time have like a fire hose of self-awareness or self-introspection. And in a lot of ways it was really helpful. In fact, it even like brought a lot of my friends together in ways where we could be vulnerable without the fear of like our families knowing about all the horrible things we were doing. Like, I don't know, having internet access at 12 or whatever it would be. um and my brother did a couple summers out there as well, and eventually I did after I graduated high school. And so this camp uh was was very important to sort of the Protestant world across Southeast Alaska, which is an archipelago of the state. And everyone, like, you can't drive to any of the other cities around from from many of the other cities. So Juneau's the biggest, but then there's also small town like Haines, Sitka, which I'll talk about later because it's very important to the Orthodox tradition here. Ketchikan, Petersburg, which is actually like a Norwegian settlement. There's everyone there is Aryan. It's very odd. Um, so a lot of these small Protestant communities were connected through Avant in this Bible camp. Um, and and so that was, how do I put it? It was like because the space of being out there was so fun as a kid. It for pretty much everybody, like their place to express their faith or to journey into it. And then once everyone went back home, after we usually do like 2 camps a summer, it was really hard for, I think, for a lot of kids to um,
Go back.
want to go to the churches in town
Yeah.
because the flavor was so different. It was, again, very insular. There are so many churches that all have like 12 people.
Hmm.
um, and so I had that main influence, which theologically was, mm, I would say, predominantly from the Young Restless Reformed movement. Again, if people are familiar with that, if you were to go to the camp library, it would be like Matt Chandler, John Piper, John MacArthur, maybe at some point, the guy from Mars Hill, Mark Driscoll. I sure hope not, but probably. Uh, so those sorts of influences. Um, but then also during this time, I was actually involved with the Assemblies of God Church, not my home church, but the youth group I was a part of and the church that my brother went to on Sunday mornings, which again, very different flavor. I remember going to some of the like youth conferences where we would have people being slain in the spirit and experiencing like physical convulsions and
Mm.
um, speaking in tongues and all that sort of thing. It was very culturally conservative, but theologically liberal, if that makes sense.
Mm.
And I would say of all the youth groups I was a part of, which was quite a few, and most of them were pretty good, that one was the best. The youth pastor that we had really cared a lot about all of us, and I remember he would like greet us at the doors, and he would always remember things about you. Like I was in cross country and track, and so every week I would have like a new meet, and he would remember what my last personal record was. And so if I PR'd, he'd be like, "Oh, like congrats!" And
Wow.
he was very personable. Um,
And remind me,
but
okay, this is like
yeah,
what, preteen years or teenage years? Like
yeah.
how?
So timeline. I guess I started going to Echo Ranch around like 11. Sorry, that's the Bible camp, Echo Ranch Bible Camp. Um,
And
and
you don't
I
know anything
started
about
going.
Orthodoxy at this point, right? It's
Nothing about Orthodoxy,
yeah.
yeah. Well, okay, not nothing. I should say, growing up in Southeast, everyone knows about the Russian Orthodox Church because, for those who don't know, Russia was actually purchased. Uh, the
Ma-
U.S.
yeah.
purchased Alaska from Russia.
Right.
Um, and so if you go to Sitka, like I did on my cross country trips when I was like 14, there's a cathedral in downtown. And it's such a small town of like, I don't know, I could be way off, maybe like 5,000 people, could be more. Uh, so when there's a cathedral, it's like you see it from literally everywhere you stand. And it's very much a part of Sitka's at least aesthetic identity, even if most people don't go to the parish. And during the summer, it's like the biggest tourist attraction because it's this pretty big uh, cathedral right in the middle of town. And it's like 10 feet from a Lutheran church also in the middle of downtown. So I was aware of the idea of it and the aesthetic of it, but I thought that it was a diocese within the Roman Catholic Church. I didn't know that there was a split. Um, and so during the time when I was involved with the Assemblies of God Church, which it's a Pentecostal denomination. I think it's actually still the fastest growing denomination of Protestantism in the country. Uh, and that was from the age of like 12 to 16, something like that. Um, and so and then I also had my home church, which was much more cessationist, but then slowly moved away from that, and very dispensational. So I had these different flavors of like American Protestantism, um, and just kind of absorbed them all,
Hmm.
and tried to figure out. Um, I was trying to find the faith, like some things about the Pentecostal groups I was a part of, I really liked. They were very personable. A lot of the people there were very humble and emphasized prayer a lot, and as best as they could, tried to experience God, which usually manifested in sort of ecstatic bodily experiences. Um, but people were trying to experience God and seeking a deeper experience beyond just like Bible and highlighter culture. Um, and then I had the Young Restless Reformed influence, and then the dispensational influence. So it was kind of confusing, especially as I got older, and um, an artistic background. My whole family are musicians to some professional degree or another, and I was at the time really interested in the visual arts, and so it was so peculiar, so individualized. How like my family, we didn't talk about Catholicism almost at all. I didn't for a long time as a kid. I assumed it was just like not even a Christian religion. I thought it was like a Christian flavored world paganism or something like that. But we would celebrate St. Patrick's Day,
Hmm.
uh, and I grew up with a deep fondness for St. Patrick and even some of the other Irish saints. I'll get to it later, but St. Kevin of Glendalough is one that I'm very fond of. Um, and so it was just to put it in a word, it was very confusing because no one could agree in my world on what Christianity even was. But at the very least, I had a lot of cultural comfort in it. There was I was never fully satisfied. I had my like born again experience when I was about 4 years old. And I took it very seriously. And by my own volunteering, I was baptized it was a single immersion Trinitarian baptism. So I will be rebaptized, baptized in the church in a Trinitarian baptism. Um, but at the age of 9, that's when I wanted to, and so I was very I don't know if frantic is the right word, but I was very desperate for a deeper sense of meaning and a deeper connectivity to God. But as a kid, I remember like my earliest memories of being at church, being in environments like that were pretty negative. Not for any particular reason other than just adolescent intuition, I guess. Like uh, I was never almost any point satisfied with feeling like what I was seeking for from God and with God was what I was experiencing at church, or that somehow they connected. And I think a huge key of that is, um, at least as I can remember growing up in that church, the deity of Christ was not really taught to me very well. And I remember being very kind of disillusioned and disinterested in all of the Bible stories that I was taught because it was a Bible church, and the emphasis was very much on like it was almost like replacing Disney with the Bible in your household. And
Hmm.
so you go to the church library, and instead of watching Finding Nemo or I don't know Avatar: The Last Airbender or something like that, you watch Veggie Tales and animated versions
Prince of
of Bible
Egypt.
stories. Yeah, Prince of Egypt. That one was at least good.
That
Yeah.
was a good one. Yeah.
um, I watched a lot of crap, a lot of nonsense.
Well,
Um,
so when you say deity of Christ,
yeah,
you mean like the godhood aspect of Christ as like the King of Kings, God of
right. That
gods.
he was God, really.
Okay.
Like we would say that he was God, and I knew that, but there was always some flavor to the language or to people's rhetoric that made it sound like you can't emphasize that too much. And I remember the only Bible stories that I really liked as a kid, or that seemed to have any deep resonance, were whenever we talked about Christ, and especially the stories of him and his disciples, or his crucifixion. Just any stories about Christ. There was something there as a kid where I was like, I like I like that. Um, and I went through this, like I said, these Awanas program. It's like Boy Scouts, so I memorized tons of scripture through that, which I'm grateful for. But it it was very dissatisfying, especially because I think I had a soul that really longed for beauty. Even as a little kid, I was very invested in, like, I don't know, um,
Well, I was gonna say you're an
uh,
artist, right? You're a natural artist.
yeah,
So
yeah,
like you like music, you like visual arts, and
sure.
to not have that as part of your worship, yeah, it makes
I
sense.
was very dissatisfied also with, like, the fact that I was expected to get more out of, like, a parable from scripture than from anything else, as though the reality, the truth of scripture, rests solely in its, like, kind
Written
of
word.
oblique interpretation, yeah, and written word, and that those truths don't extend or manifest all over reality. And fast forward to when I was like 15 or something like that. At this point, I still was like really struggling with any kind of connectivity between what I wanted from reality, really. Also struggling growing up with a very severe dissociative disorder, really needing meaning in my life in some way or another. Um, and for me, the way that I found meaning, the way that I was motivated to live was like a math problem. I basically was like, well, if I believe these presuppositions about salvation, that we're all going to die, but if you can aid other people in their salvation, if you can sway them, convince them at one point in time to confess to Christ, then they'll live for eternity. And so your life wasn't meaningless. And I remember thinking as like a 10-year-old, 9-year-old, like, well, if I can sway one person into salvation, then my life like will have mattered at least a little bit.
Mhm.
Um,
It's quite a thought for a 9-year-old.
yeah, unfortunately, yeah, that's how I was. Um, yeah.
Cursed with
uh,
intellect.
I guess you could say. Um, but there was this one summer where, like, everyone in my grade, for it felt that way, at least everyone in my grade went out to Echo Ranch, had this big emotional experience, and all of a sudden was really contented with the church, as I'll say, where the people that I was surrounded by, that were like confessing believers or whatever, we would do like Bible studies almost every day. We would ride our bikes somewhere and do them and talk about how we could be better Christians and that sort of thing. There was such an emotional high around it, and, especially being homeschooled, having such a, lack of, big friend group posses and that sort of thing, especially with public school kids. I think I sort of conflated, the experience of God with just kind of like a little bit of adolescent freedom, especially being very sheltered as a kid. And so there was a time where I was like, "Oh, wow, I get it." Like, "Oh, this is a wonderful thing," being a part of these friend groups, and I because I, like, sort of grew up knowing a lot of things about scripture and that sort of thing, or at least having that sort of, reputation, it was also a way where I could have a social identity, in the kid who knows this Bible verse or that Bible. Oh, if you have a question, you can ask him. And to being able to be that person in, like, a public school environment was, like, it what it did is that it softened or distracted from all of the sort of deep yearnings that I had been
Mm,
having my entire life. And so there was this brief period of, like, uh, almost like euphoria of some kind where I
mhm.
was like, "Oh, friends," and all that. And, I mean, I had friends growing up, but it's different when there's so many kids. And then I went to public school part-time in high school and did sports and stuff. But around right before COVID, like, maybe a year and a half before COVID, we left the church that I grew up at, because of scandal. Um, and we ended up trying to, like, look around churches in town, and what was really hard for me was that I was cut off from that friend group. Like, I wasn't allowed to go to the youth group anymore, and all these sorts of things, because my parents really wanted to, like, create that separation. And all of a sudden, this sort of, emotional regulating like safety that I had was gone. Um, and that's really when I started to question, uh, not just philosophically, but kind of historically, like what was I doing? Like, what am I a part of? There's a really famous sermon from Paul Washer, who's one of the Young Restless Reform guys, called like angry. No, it's something like intense preaching to youth students or something like that. It was big on YouTube, where he says something like, "This is Christianity, and we're treating it like a pop culture." And I remember that resonated with me, not because I thought he had a point, but because I was like, yeah, when he's saying Christianity, he's invoking that like the side that he's advocating for is the true faith. And so I looked into that, and I had my John MacArthur study Bible, and was really into that theological niche. And I remember realizing pretty quickly, like, this can't be the true faith. Um, and because of my roots growing deeper in sort of the evangelical world, we church hopped a lot in COVID and landed at a church that it was very nice, but very deconstructionist.
Mm,
It was actually one of those churches that kind of had the mentality of we want to recapture what the apostles had in the book of Acts.
mm,
But we went the low church direction where it was in a circle. We were very community oriented, very philanthropic, but it was basically a Bible study. And for me, being so disillusioned with at that point with the evangelical culture, um, it all just kind of came to a crash where I went the opposite direction. I became as low church as you could possibly be. I was basically a Quaker.
mm.
Um, and and because I saw the Catholic Church, the Apostolic Faith, Russian Orthodoxy as I knew it, all as just an even worse version of what I had just left because of all this scandal, and I really started to see the kind of like almost the delusions that I was a part of in trying to experience God through bodily ecstatic experiences. Um, and I kind of felt that the only way I could really be an authentic Christian would be to not associate with the church in any um,
Official
meaningful way,
way.
sort of
Yeah.
official way. And that was kind of the attitude of the church that we were part of. One of our mantras was that there have been many Jesus followers throughout history who have known the way, but Christians have constantly let people down. And especially as a Westerner, that's like very true. Um, but it was it was very tumultuous. I was in a lot of spiritual pain constantly because I I couldn't find a way to manifest or to experience God or to pursue Christ in a way that I just didn't know what I was doing. Um, and in fact, when I was like 15 or 16 during COVID, I read this book. It's called Silence. It's translated from Japanese by Shisaku
Mm.
Endo, and it was adapted into a
A
film
film,
with
yeah.
Andrew
Christopher
Garfield.
Nolan.
It's Martin Scorsese.
Sorry, yeah,
It's a
Martin
very,
Scorsese,
very
sorry.
very good film, very good
Yeah,
adaptation of the story, and it's about Jesuit priests in Japan.
yeah.
And it was truly the first time. I'd always been very ecumenically minded, and when I learned a little bit more about Catholicism and the Apostolic Faith, I was like, oh yeah, I'm sure they're saved. Um, as I understood it. But this was the first time I really was emotionally invested in the lives. It's historical fiction, but it's also quite accurate to these Jesuit priests in Japan. And it, I essentially had like an emotional breakdown experience reading the book, and the sort of intimacy that is described between the priests and Christ and the priests and their flock was something that I just desperately wanted my whole life. Intimacy with people, experiencing God through people. Uh, and and it stuck with me, but it took quite a while as my roots started to grow deeper in the evangelical world. I at one point in time, we'll say freshman year of college, I was, even though I had so many issues in my mind and I couldn't fit it all together, I was planning on being a missionary with that interdenominational group. Uh, and um, I'll say that was in like 2022 or so. I graduated high school that year. Um, and I read one of my friends who was a missionary from that organization gave me a book called Mission to the Headhunters. I think it was missionary efforts in South America. And there were lots of like great stories of people helping these indigenous communities by bringing them medicine and stuff, but there was something off. And, I was maybe 15, 16, 17, somewhere around there. So I was, really learning about colonialism and a lot of the terrible efforts and secondhand experiences from people I talked to about the issues of evangelical cross-cultural missionary works. Um, and I was like, is this something that I really want to participate in? And it wasn't too long after that I took an Alaska history course and learned about Father Viniaminov. I don't think I'm saying that right. Um, didn't wasn't for quite a while that I learned that was Saint Innocent, the Bishop of all Alaska.
Mhm.
Our
So you're
cathedral is
learning
named after
about
him.
Saint Innocent from a college course in university?
It was actually this was my senior year of high school,
Oh, high school. Oh, wow.
and it was during this time where I was grappling with like, is it ethical for me to do this? To be this mission? What am I actually providing for people? What am I bringing to them? Is this good news? We call this good news, but it really to me was like uh, a problem that God created that then solved within Himself that you then have to have an emotional reaction to in order to like have any value with. It was all about that emotional ecstatic experience of God.
So
Um,
in that ethos, it's like you can't know God or you can't have a relationship with Him unless you have this experience. And so they would try to elicit this experience in whoever they're
exactly.
missionizing to. Okay.
And the sort of the camp that I was a part of, which I did live at and was a counselor for my when I was like 19, um, was very much more conservative. We didn't do any sort of, you're not expected to feel God in your body sort of thing. But it was very neo-Calvinistic, 5-point Calvinistic. And when I was like 15 years old, there was something about the virtue of humility that I actually became convinced that that's what Scripture teached. I know that sounds insane to an Orthodox Christian, but to me, the sort of archetype of the humble person was something that I deep down really wished was what the Bible taught, but I genuinely didn't believe that. Uh, and as a kid, I was very into like Star Wars. I said it earlier, like Avatar, The Last Airbender, all these sorts of things where the the archetypal saint, if you will, the holy person is always someone who's just deeply humble. And it's not that
Hmm.
complicated. Like they have their strength through their humility, like Qui-Gon Jinn or Uncle Iroh or something like that. And I was very influenced by that and yearned for it in the faith, but it wasn't really there for me. Um, and I became stuck on this idea of humility and what it means uh really to be radically humble and not to just sort of have it as a label of like, I don't know, mild expectation or something like that. And so because of that, I kind of became a neo-Calvinist on accident. Was like thinking to myself as a kid or as like a 15-year-old, whatever, that like, oh yeah, if I am saved by grace and there's no merit that I offer to that, and Christ says not to, or Ephesians, we don't boast. So like I sort of pieced it together and thought, uh okay, I'm going to force myself into humility by dogma, basically, is what I did. And then I learned about the 5 points of Calvinism, as it were, and I was like, okay, that lines up. So I became a Calvinist, not a historic Calvinist, but someone who believed that we have no free will and that we are saved, elected by Christ, or I guess by God the Father, as I would have put it, for salvation. And it was like at that moment, I think this would have been like 2019, 16 years old, something like that. That's really when I started to seek the true faith, I think, because I couldn't get rid of this idea of humility and that what that could actually mean. And I don't want to, not saying that no one in my world was humble or anything like that, not at all. In fact, I really like John Piper, for example, because within that sort of circle, he had very humble qualities to his rhetoric and his personality that I looked up to. But I wanted something more extreme. I think, what does radical humility look like? And I think radical humility looks like seeing another culture and actually um, lowering yourself to it. And that's what I saw in Father Viniaminov, again, probably not saying it right. His immense efforts to kind of, in some ways, protect the indigenous culture from the Russian fur trade company, which was persecuting the indigenous people, taking their wives, taking their animals, forcing them to hunt for them, all these sorts of things. And his efforts to preserve their culture, as is tradition of the Orthodox faith, create a written language for them so that their language not only could be read in services, but just be preserved for its own sake. Um, that deeply resonated with me, and I never forgot about it. But again, roots started to grow deeper. I couldn't exactly explore that without making people worried, and people were always like considered me kind of fringe because I would just have a lot of questions and that sort of thing.
So learning about Saint Innocent's like approach to missionary work, you compared that with how you saw the missionary work of like down in the South America, and you're seeing the difference between the two
Right.
spirits,
I
right?
was seeing
Yeah.
the difference. Yeah, definitely. And it was so subtle. Like the the evangelical missionaries that I know, I think are nice people and they really do mean well. I just think that the good news that they're bringing has a lot of poison in it as well. Uh, and I experienced that poison. And one of the things, um, I'm not a theologian, and I definitely don't want to pretend to be one. But I do feel confident saying that I I as a teacher of the gospel that I knew would tell people that in order to be good, in order to be loved, you have to be good, and that in some sense God is subservient to his own sense of justice in order to be good. And that's a very damaging thing for people to believe, especially who've experienced trauma and abuse, because it is not a medicinal form of salvation. It's not therapeutic. It's very metaphysical. It's harsh, and it manifests that way. It really does. Uh, and when I was
Well, it's saying you
doing
don't
that sort of
deserve God's love and salvation unless you're already good.
right,
But
but
Christ
then
visits. He went to Zacchaeus' house. You know, the guy that climbed the sycamore tree, who was a tax collector and a sinner, right? He visited. He said, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house, and I'm going to dine with you, and visited him personally before his repentance. And that's something that I don't know if you know Father
yeah,
Spiridon Bailey. He's on YouTube, and
I do. Yeah,
he talks about that. And he's like, that's a microcosm of Christ coming into your heart even before repentance. Like, he's visiting. Christ dined with sinners. He spent time with harlots and tax collectors and liars and thieves and these kinds of folks,
yeah,
because he comes to call sinners, not the righteous, but sinners to repentance, right? So, yeah, that's definitely a damaging way to view how
it
God
is.
operates, right?
And the way that we would argue around that, because like if I don't know, one of my friends from that was a part of Avant Missionaries Ministries heard this, they'd be like, "Oh, that's not what we believe." But the theological categories imply that, especially because God has to essentially gaslight himself into loving you. Martin Luther would say that, and I know that sounds scandalous. I don't mean to offend anyone,
No, it's
but
just funny.
it is damaging, yeah, to believe that in order for God the Father to see you accurately, in order to see you as you truly are and still love you, he can't. Therefore, Christ has to act as a blanket of snow across it. I'm paraphrasing Martin Luther. He has to act as a blanket of snow across the fecal matter that you actually are in order for you to experience God's love. God can't see you and love you at the same time. That's what it means to believe in penal substitutionary atonement. And I was teaching that to people, and I remember serving at the camp with a bunch of 6-year olds and well, like 7, 8, and 9-year olds. And I remember thinking, like, this is wrong to tell them that uh, they need this bad news before the good news, as though these kids don't probably have hard enough lives as it is. And so it really brought me into question, like, what is this salvation that we're talking about? Um, I had tangential uh, understandings, interactions with Buddhism at the time, and it started to become clear to me that like these Eastern beliefs, they have a much more um, I want to say like manifest understanding of salvation, or that somehow like you don't need to presuppose all of these categories and metaphysical things in order to be saved. It's like you know what you need to be saved from, and it's the passions. And what I was telling kids was that you don't even know that you need to be saved. You don't know yet that you're a terrible, disgusting thing before God. But the good news is that he loved you enough to oddly send one of himself out from himself, and then punish him and kill him, and cause him violence, and that somehow saves you. So we're saved by violence, is really what I was telling them. Uh, and I don't I don't think that's the gospel.
Right.
And so learning about Saint Innocent, and that different, to use the buzzword, it's a different phronema that I wasn't used to, resonated with me. And eventually, I want to say around like 3 years ago, I can't remember exactly. The turn started to happen where I went away from the sort of very low church uh, belief in Christ and what it means to be a Christian, to like, oh, maybe there's something to this whole concept of the apostolic church. As an artist, that's clearly what drove me. Seeing the kind of inarguable superiority to the aesthetics of the apostolic faiths, all of them, to what I was doing and what I was surrounded by. And I very much believe that aesthetics are not arbitrary; they are natural outcomes of the presuppositions that that group carries. Um, and if I looked at what was manifest by myself in my world, it would be saying to the rest of the world, we don't care about beauty, we don't care about anything other than getting people into heaven. And so I in 2023, I flew to Sicca to go to St. Michael's Cathedral, for liturgy, not knowing that there was a priest in Juneau. And I sat through the service, in like the corner, just trying to be respectful. And the things that stood out to me the most were, I thought it was very odd that the priest, I couldn't see him for a while before the great entrance. Um, it was like the singing back and forth from the chanting to the behind the iconostasis. That was very odd. I was not prepared for that. But they did do the Lord's Prayer in Tlingit, the indigenous language of Southeast, as well as Russian and English, and probably some other languages. And that was the thing that really stuck out to me. I was like, okay, that's the thing that at least this person, Saint Innocent, brought this faith here, and these people are still experiencing it.
And still retaining their culture.
Yeah, yeah. And afterwards, I spoke with Father Herman, the priest there, and I remember at this time being so bogged down in uh, argumentation for the apostolic churches, whether that's from mainline Protestant churches, looking into their arguments, Catholicism, Orthodoxy, and everything. And I was expected he would say something along the lines of like, "Oh, you need to read this book, the Orthodox Church by Timothy Ware," which I'd already read at the time. I figured it would be something along those lines, which is what most people would say, is like, "Oh, you need to read this Bible passage, or you need to read this and that." All arguments from propositions. And all he was just like, he kind of thought about it. He was like, "Oh, so seems like you might be on your way to the Orthodox Church." And I was like, "Well, I don't know about that. I'm just curious." And he said, "Well, you should just study the lives of one of the saints, like maybe Saint Herman," or he might have said like Saint Mary of Egypt or something along those lines. And I was like, it really struck me as that is a different kind of answer, because he wasn't arguing for arbitrary uh, what I would consider like morally arbitrary propositions or presuppositions or anything along those lines. It was just like uh, the fruit of this belief. He said, "Look at the fruit," is what he was saying. Um, and he gave me prayer beads. They're still right over there, and like a really little icon of the Theotokos. Actually, a recreation of a miracle working icon that we have in Sitka. And uh, that was like that was the perfect thing that he could have said, because I was already so bogged down in hearing every argument that I could find um, for finding the true faith, that what he offered was truth. It wasn't argument. Um, it was reality, the reality of the faith.
I just
And
had
then he
a
came.
sorry to interrupt you, but I
No,
just
no.
had another interview with another brother, and I told him like that's what Christ did. He didn't argue with people. He j-
Right.
he just
Yeah.
told the truth, and as God, he knows the truth of that none of us know, which is the truth of our own hearts. And so that's kind of what we as Orthodox do, is we just tell the truth and we show the beauty of our faith. We don't necessarily engage in apologetics, even though there is a place for that, and there is some element to that. But yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, and again, coming from a background that was so focused on apologetics, so much, so almost antagonistic, to hear that kind of response from just a humble person, um, it was really radical. Not in like a like whoa kind of way, but it just was. Yeah, it stuck with me. And although I connected with the priest in Juneau at the very small parish, I connected with him via email, and at the time was more invested in the church that I was going to, this evangelical church, and was like a sort of youth pastor, basically. Uh, and when you are doing that, you can't exactly skip a Sunday morning to go to the local Russian Orthodox church without some people asking questions or talking about you, at the very least. Um, and so I never went because just for things going on in my personal life, it really wasn't an option that I felt was like, frankly, safe for my environment. It would have been I would have had a lot of pushback. I'll put it that way for doing that. And so it just stayed via email. And then I moved to Anchorage in I think like August of 2024. Um, and all of a sudden I was free from all these expectations. And although I pretty quickly got plugged into the evangelical like campus group that we had, I pretty quickly also started going to the cathedral on Sundays. Uh, and throughout this whole time, the only thing really Orthodox I was doing was the Jesus prayer, because he'd given me those prayer beads. I was reading, but that doesn't really count. Um, I had the Jesus prayer and I had a couple icons, and it was still all very confusing. I was very bogged down, and I knew I am not going to convert to this by argument alone. It can't be, because then I'll just hear another argument and leave. Um, it has to be a deeper reality. It has to be a deeper epistemological experience. Um, and I quickly, once I started really investing effort, I guess you could say, into praying the Jesus prayer, as the best as I can without at all knowing what I'm doing, having no real virtue. I the All I can say is that the grace that I experienced from it did not it made it much harder to remain in the evangelical world that I did, because the sort of person that people expected of me, the sort of things that I was encouraged to do, were not aligning with that prayer. Um, and it's not that anyone was like doing anything wrong or scandalizing me or asking me to do anything horrible. It was small things. It was like the the expectation to take on uh, evangelizing efforts and be a person of authority just because I've read the Bible, just because I can quote it a little better than some people. I'm expected to be basically a church leader is
Mm-hmm.
like what it was. And I started to see myself probably for the first time through the prayer and realized that if I stay here, that is fueling my passions. It's fueling my passions to be congratulated all the time. It's fueling my passions to be seen as uh, wise without any real wisdom. Um, and eventually, it got to the point where I realized I, at the time, could care less, honestly, about arguments for the apostolic succession of the Orthodox Church. Whether or not this or that had changed, this or that. And at the time, I hadn't read Thinking Orthodox by Dr. Jeannie Constantino, which is probably a good thing because then I would have started arguing with people. Um, but I met with Father Vasily, my priest, and for the first time, I had a sit down conversation with the priest since like 2 years prior, however long it was. And I asked him, if I become Orthodox, do I have to defend the faith? Do I have to basically be an apologist and explain my reason? Because I really don't have one. I have so many reasons, and at the same time, they feel like completely irrelevant to why I'm converting. And he said, like, no, basically, please don't, please don't. But just be here, just experience the services. And it's not that I had to set aside my rationale. I didn't have to set aside anything. I just had to be there. Um, if anything, I feel like my use of reason, my use of logic, um, has its place better as I experience the church more. It's like its hierarchy is fit into my world in a healthier place, where it's not my only form of knowledge, but that I I have true faith, not faith of like um, it's like. But when I was a kid, faith was kind of explained as though you have to just be emotionally convinced or be like rationally convinced and then have these emotions from these presuppositions about salvation. But my experience in the church has just been just to be there, really. It's enough to experience the church and not have to force anything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and
Come and
experiencing
see.
true peace. Yeah, come and see. Experience, and also having hierarchy, like legitimate hierarchy with priests and bishops, is very wonderful because I don't have to search the scriptures like a maniac trying to figure everything out. Like, I can just accept the fact that they know so much more than me, not just because they're more accredited, but because they're humbler, they're holier than me, and it's pretty obvious. And that reality is the most freeing thing.
Yeah.
I don't have to start the faith. The faith has been handed down.
You have
Um,
to start from the
it's
scratch.
terrifying. It's terrifying to have to start. Yeah. And also, I'm just going to throw it in there. These two books that were very helpful for me. This one, Orthodox Alaska by Michael Alexa. He's one of the leading experts on the indigenous uh, communities throughout Alaska. He passed away recently, but he used to give lectures at the university, and he's very well loved, especially by the indigenous community here. And his life effort, in many ways, was to bring acknowledgement of Saint Olga to the Orthodox world, who, for those who don't know, was recently glorified and recognized as a saint. I think around the same time that I started coming to the
Yeah,
church,
it's 2023, I
and
think.
yeah, and we had I think it's just called the glorification service for her uh, at the cathedral last summer, and it was wonderful. It was very
Yeah.
pan-Orthodox.
I watched
Richard
that on
Rowland
live
from
stream.
the Symbolic World was there.
Was he really? Wow, okay.
He was, yeah. I saw
Yeah.
him like a head over everybody, and I was like, I know that guy.
My wife and I
Obviously,
watched the live stream, but I don't think I noticed him.
that's so cool. That's
Yeah,
so cool. Yeah. If you couldn't tell already, the Symbolic World was also very influential to me. I'm a big fan of
naturally.
Jonathan Pageau.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as well as this book, um, Siddhartha. It's not an Orthodox book, obviously, um, but I won't even try to explain it. I'll just say that it was very helpful in reworking a lot of a lot of my Western phronema before approaching the church, kind of reevaluating what it means to be saved in a lot of ways. I didn't really have any kind of concept of the passions before being at all invested in Buddhism. And I found the fullness of that truth in the faith. And I know it might sound weird, but I thing I look forward to the most is being able to go to confession. God willing, I'll be brought into the church on Lazarus Saturday along with my wife. Uh, and that is a reality so divorced from the one that I grew up in. I mean, we would confess sins, but it was very different. uh, and the grace, there was some grace there, but again, it wasn't the fullness of the faith.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
yeah.
glory to God. I mean, what a wonderful story and journey,
Thank you.
especially as such a young man. Um, yeah, I think I was reading. Actually, it was a wasn't reading. It was I don't read. I just watch YouTube. It was a YouTube short from Richard Rowland, and he was saying that the amount of Gen Z that are identifying as Orthodox is like it's like 5 times what it is
Wow.
for Gen X and millennials. So there's definitely
Wow.
this growth in the young generations and searching for truth because they've been handed a world that lacks truth and lacks meaning and lacks purpose, right? So it's beautiful to see that, and I appreciate you sharing your story because there might be some young men watching this that are similar in age and maybe they have similar
Sure.
experiences growing up, and your testimony is really helpful for other people to relate, right? Like you said that when you had that experience of being a part of a social circle after you left, your very tiny community, um,
Yeah,
it's very helpful to be connected with like-minded folks and with people that are on similar paths to you. So
definitely.
yeah, I appreciate you coming
Yeah.
on. I mean, it's like
Thank you so
we,
much.
we can talk like so much more. I
Oh my
think you have
word. Yeah.
a lot to share, which is awesome. So maybe we can do another episode together sometime.
Yeah, I would love to.
Uh,
I mean, it's so funny because like I probably touched on legitimately like 10% of what I could have.
yeah,
Um, I mean, like to say, how did you come to the faith is basically asking your whole life story. Um, all the threads connect to the faith. I could talk about how music brought me to the church. I could talk about how iconography did. I mean, I studied. I was really interested in movie posters as a when I was into illustration, the language of them, the sort of visual hierarchy of them, and that is part of what brought me to the church was seeing Christ Pantocrator for the first time. It touched me on such a deep level. Having been an not a literal iconoclast, but uh, theologically iconoclast.
right,
Uh, Iconography was huge for me, and still is. I'm not converted. I'm converting.
right.
Yeah.
Well, God bless you, man, and you keep me updated on your journey and your
Yeah, of course.
baptism, and many years to
Thank
you
you,
and your
Matthew.
wife. Appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks everyone for watching. Show Isaiah some love and let us know what you think about his testimony in the comments below. And we'll see you in the next video. Godspeed.
Thank you so much.